I died in a prison cell at 11:43 p.m. on a cold December night. My sister Amy stood there watching as my ex-fiancé James injected me with poison, both of them smirking while I convulsed on the floor. The last thing I saw was Amy wearing my favorite necklace, the one James gave me when he proposed. 5 years of perfectly planned betrayal ended with my murder, framed for a crime I never committed. But death wasn't the end of my story. I woke up gasping in my old bedroom, back in my 18-year-old body. The calendar on my wall reads July 15th, 2019, exactly 1 week before I originally met James at my father's company party. My hands are shaking. As I touch my face in the mirror, young and unmarked by the years of manipulation and abuse that awaited me in my past life, this time will be different. I know every move they'll make, every lie they'll tell, and every weakness they possess. James thinks he's the master manipulator? Let him try his games against someone who's already seen how it ends. As for my dear sister Amy, she'll learn what it feels like when family turns against family. They destroyed me once, using my trust and love as weapons. Now I'm back, and I'll make them tear each other apart. But revenge isn't my only goal. This time, I'm rewriting my destiny on my own terms. Before we start this video, buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. The fluorescent lights flickered above me as I lay dying on the cold prison floor. My sister Amy's designer heels clicked against the concrete as she circled my convulsing body, her perfectly manicured hand clutching the necklace James had given me when he proposed. The same necklace he'd taken back just before they injected me with poison. "You should have known better than to trust either of us," Amy said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Did you really think someone like James would choose you over me?" I tried to speak, to curse them both, but my throat had already begun to close. James stood in the corner, his expensive suit pristine as ever, watching me with those cold eyes I'd once mistaken for love. 5 years of careful manipulation, of playing the perfect fiancé while he and my sister systematically destroyed my life, all leading to this moment. The guard they'd bribed looked away as my vision began to fade. The last thing I heard was Amy's laughter, echoing off the prison walls, then darkness. When I opened my eyes again, sunlight was streaming through familiar lavender curtains. My heart pounded as I shot upright, hands immediately going to my throat. I could breathe. I was alive. I scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over the stuffed animals that still littered my childhood bedroom floor. The mirror above my dresser showed me a face I hadn't seen in years, young and unmarked by the stress and betrayal that had aged me beyond my years in prison. My hands trembled as I touched my cheek, smooth and unwrinkled. The calendar on my wall read July 15th, 2019, 1 week before I would meet James at my father's company party. 1 week before everything would begin to go wrong. I sank onto my bed, mind racing. This was impossible. I had died. I was certain of it. Yet here I was, back in my 18-year-old body with all my memories intact. A second chance. "Sarah, breakfast!" My mother's voice carried up the stairs, making me flinch. The last time I'd heard that voice, she'd been testifying against me in court, convinced by Amy's tears and James's evidence that I'd embezzled millions from my father's company. I dressed mechanically, muscle memory guiding me through a morning routine I hadn't performed in years. Designer clothes I'd forgotten I owned hung in my closet, all carefully selected to please my mother's exacting standards. I chose a simple blue sundress, remembering how it had once been my favorite before prison jumpsuits became my daily attire. The kitchen smelled of coffee and fresh bread, exactly as it had every morning of my youth. Amy sat at the island counter, scrolling through her phone while picking at a grapefruit. She looked so young, so innocent. If I hadn't lived through what she would become, I might have been fooled again by her act. "Finally," my mother said, barely glancing up from her tablet. "I was beginning to think you'd sleep all day. The Chen sisters should always be early risers." I bit back the bitter laugh that threatened to escape. The Chen sisters. As if we had ever truly been sisters after Amy decided she wanted everything. I had. "Sorry, Mother," I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "I had trouble sleeping." "Well, don't make a habit of it. Your father's company party is next week, and I won't have you looking tired in front of all those important people." The company party, where James would approach me, pretending to be impressed by my insight into market trends, where he would charm me with his knowledge of art and literature, making me feel special and understood for the first time in my life, where Amy would watch from across the room, already plotting how to use my newfound happiness against me. "Of course not," I murmured, accepting a cup of coffee from our housekeeper Maria. One more person who would testify against me, convinced convinced by Amy's tears that I had stolen from her retirement fund. A moving truck rumbled past the window, catching my attention. The new neighbors. In my past life, I had been too preoccupied with James to pay them much attention. Now I watched as a young man about my age lifted boxes from the back of the truck, his movements efficient and purposeful. "That must be the Reynolds boy," my mother said, following my gaze. "His father bought the Henderson place. New money, of course, but they seem respectable enough." Marcus Reynolds. The name sparked a vague memory of a kind smile at neighborhood gatherings, of brief conversations that had seemed unimportant at the time. Had he known what was happening to me? Had he seen through James and Amy's perfect facade? "Sarah, are you listening?" My mother's sharp tone cut through my thoughts. "I said you need to stop by your father's office today. He wants to discuss your summer internship." The internship, where James had first suggested I move money between accounts to help cover supposed losses, where Amy had worked alongside me, gathering evidence of transactions I hadn't even known were illegal. "I'll go this afternoon," I said, already formulating plans. This time I had years of business knowledge trapped in my 18-year-old brain. This time I would see through their schemes before they could begin. Amy glanced up from her phone, a familiar calculating look in her eyes. "Want me to come with you?" I was planning to stop by anyway. To see James, no doubt. They had already been dating in secret by this point, laying the groundwork for my destruction. "No need," I said, smiling with a sweetness I didn't feel. "I know how busy you are with your charity work." The charity that would later be used to launder money, with all evidence pointing to me as the mastermind. Amy's expression flickered with surprise at my refusal. In my past life, I had always begged for her company, desperate for my sister's approval. "Besides," I added, "I thought you had plans with Jennifer today." Amy's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't mentioned any plans, but I remembered this day. She would meet James at a hotel under the pretense of shopping with her friend Jennifer, who was already being paid to provide alibis for their secret rendezvous. "Right," she said slowly. "I almost forgot." My mother beamed at us both, oblivious to the tension. "My beautiful girl's always so busy. You make me so proud." I finished my coffee and excused myself, needing air. Outside, Marcus Reynolds was still unloading boxes. He looked up as I passed, offering a friendly wave. "New neighbor," he called out. "Marcus Reynolds." I stopped, studying him properly for the first time. Warm brown eyes, honest face, the kind of genuine smile I had forgotten existed after years of James's practiced charm. "Sarah Chen," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Welcome to the neighborhood." "Thanks. Hey, any chance you know a good coffee place around here? I've been running on energy drinks since dawn." In my past life, I had brushed him off, too focused on my upcoming meeting with James. Now I found myself saying, "I know just the place." I was headed that way myself. A small change, but perhaps an important one. After all, I had a second chance at life. This time, I would be ready for James and Amy's games. This time, I would make them destroy each other while I reclaimed everything they had stolen from me. Marcus fell into step beside me, chatting easily about the neighborhood. I let his warm voice wash over me, a counterpoint to the cold calculations running through my mind. The pieces were already in motion. In 1 week, James would enter my life again, expecting to find a naive girl he could manipulate and destroy. Instead, he would find me, and this time, I would be ready. The week before the company party passed in a blur of careful preparation. Each morning, I reviewed my memories of what had happened in my past life, plotting out every move I would need to make. James would be expecting a naive, eager-to-please girl he could mold to his purposes. I would give him exactly that, while laying the groundwork for his eventual destruction. My father's office hadn't changed from my memories. The same imposing mahogany desk, the same wall of awards and certificates, the same subtle scent of expensive cologne and power. He barely looked up when I entered, just as he had barely looked at me throughout my life until Amy and James convinced him I had stolen millions from his company. "Sarah," he said, shuffling through papers, "take a seat." I sat, watching him with new eyes, the slight gray at his temples, the faint tremor in his hands that he tried to hide, the way his shoulders hunched forward when he worked, signs of stress I had missed before, too wrapped up in my own desire for his approval. "Your mother tells me you want to start in the financial department," he said finally, looking up. "Why?" In my past life, I had stumbled through an answer about wanting to understand the business better. This time, I was prepared, because that's where we're most vulnerable, I said calmly. Our current financial controls are outdated, and we're losing money through inefficiencies in our international transactions. I've studied our quarterly reports, and I believe I can help streamline our processes. He stared at me, really seeing me for perhaps the first time. "You've studied our reports?" "Yes, and I've noticed patterns in our foreign exchange losses that suggest we're not timing our transactions optimally. We could save millions by implementing a better hedging strategy. Knowledge from my future self spilled out, years of business experience trapped in my 18-year-old brain. My father's expression shifted from surprise to interest as I outlined specific improvements we could make. "That's impressive analysis," he said finally, "but why not start in marketing like your sister? It's more suitable for someone your age, because that would put me too far from where James would try to implement his schemes." Because Amy was already using her marketing position to build relationships with the board members, who would later believe her tears when she accused me of theft. "Because finance is where I can make the biggest impact," I said simply. "Unless you don't think I'm capable?" A challenge. My father had never been able to resist a challenge. "Very well," he said after a long moment. "You can start Monday, but I'll be watching your work closely." Perfect. Let him watch. Let him see exactly how capable I was, so that when James and Amy made their move, he would have reason to doubt their accusations. As I left his office, I caught sight of Amy slipping into the elevator at the end of the hall. Right on schedule, she would be meeting James for lunch, not knowing I remembered every detail of their secret rendezvous. I took the stairs instead, emerging into the lobby just as Marcus Reynolds walked through the front doors. He looked surprised to see me, then pleased. "Sarah, I didn't expect to run into you here. My father's company," I explained, noting how his suit, while not as expensive as James's would be, was perfectly tailored to his athletic frame. "What brings you to this part of town?" "Job interview, actually. In the IT department." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I was beginning to recognize as a sign of nervous honesty, so different from James's calculated movements. "I know it's nepotism since my father knows yours, but I'm hoping to prove myself on my own merits. In my past life, I had barely registered that Marcus worked for my father's company. Now I saw the potential advantage. IT would have access to all the company's systems, including the financial records James would later use to frame me." "I'm sure you will," I said warmly. "Have you had lunch? I know a great place nearby." Over sandwiches at a small cafe, I learned more about Marcus than I had bothered to discover in my previous life. He was intelligent but unpretentious, ambitious but ethical. Most importantly, he had a background in cybersecurity that could prove invaluable. "The problem with most corporate systems," he explained, gesturing with a French fry, "is that they focus on external threats while leaving themselves vulnerable to internal manipulation. One person with the right access could do a lot of damage." "That's fascinating," I said, and meant it. "I'm starting in finance next week. Maybe we could compare notes sometime about system vulnerabilities." His eyes lit up at the suggestion. "I'd like that. And maybe we could get coffee again, to discuss work stuff." The hint of uncertainty in his voice was endearing. Again, I thought of how different he was from James's smooth confidence. "I'd like that too." The week continued. Each day a careful balance of appearing normal while setting up pieces for the long game ahead. I attended my mother's charity luncheons, watching Amy charm the society wives who would later testify to my apparent greed and instability. I reviewed company financial reports, marking the accounts James would eventually use to transfer funds. I had coffee with Marcus between his IT training sessions, gathering information about the company's security systems. Finally, the night of the company party arrived. I stood in front of my mirror, deliberately recreating the outfit I had worn. In my past life, a black cocktail dress that made me look older, more sophisticated. James had once told me it was what first caught his attention. Now I wore it like armor, knowing exactly what effect it would have. "You look beautiful," Amy said from my doorway, her voice sweet with fake sisterly affection. She wore red, as she had before, calculated to draw attention without being obvious about it. "Want to arrive together?" "Of course," I said, matching her tone perfectly. Let her think nothing had changed. Let her believe I was still the trusting sister she could manipulate so easily. The party was exactly as I remembered. Crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, the carefully curated mix of board members and rising stars in the company. My father held court near the bar, while my mother flitted between groups of society wives. Amy disappeared into the crowd as soon as we arrived, positioning herself where James would see her after he approached me. I got myself a glass of champagne and waited by the window overlooking the city. 3, 2, 1. Beautiful view, isn't it? James stood beside me, exactly as handsome as I remembered in his perfectly tailored suit. His smile was practiced charm, his eyes already evaluating how best to play me. "The city looks like a constellation of stars," I said, quoting my response from my past life. "Poetic." He turned slightly, angling his body toward mine in a way designed to suggest intimate conversation. "You must be Sarah Chen. I've heard interesting things about your ideas for improving our financial systems." And so it began. began. I let him guide the conversation, playing my part perfectly while watching him play his. Every compliment, every seemingly spontaneous shared interest, every careful touch of his hand to my arm was exactly as I remembered. What I hadn't noticed before was how his gaze occasionally flickered to where Amy stood across the room, how she positioned herself to always be in his line of sight. The subtle game they played, using me as their unwitting pawn. "We should continue this discussion over dinner," James said finally, right on cue. "I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on international finance." "I'd like that," I said softly, letting him see the blush I could still summon at will. As he walked away, I caught sight of Marcus standing near the bar. He raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement, his expression concerned. Had he seen something in my interaction with James that worried him? Or was I imagining complexity in what was simply friendly interest? Amy appeared at my elbow, right on schedule. "He's handsome," she said, her voice conspiratorial, "and single. You should go for it." I looked at my sister, seeing beyond her encouraging smile to the calculation beneath. In my past life, I had been pathetically grateful for her approval. Now I recognized it for what it was, the first move in her elaborate game. "Maybe I will," I said, letting her see exactly what she expected. A younger sister eager for romance and validation. The party continued around us, a glittering facade hiding darker currents. James circulated smoothly through the crowd, charming board members and department heads. Amy played her role as the sociable younger daughter, while occasionally exchanging subtle glances with him, and I watched it all, remembering how this night had set in motion events that would lead to my death in a prison cell. Not this time. This time, I knew every move they would make before they made it. This time, I would use their own game against them. Marcus caught up with me as I was leaving, falling into step beside me in the parking garage. "Hey, wanna grab coffee tomorrow? I'd love to hear your thoughts about those system vulnerabilities we discussed." I smiled. Genuinely this time. "Actually, yes. I think that could be very useful." The pieces were in motion. James thought he had found his perfect target. Amy believed she was manipulating events perfectly. Neither of them realized that every step they took toward my destruction would lead instead to their own. I drove home through the quiet streets, planning my next moves. The game had begun, but this time I was the one writing the rules. My first week at the company unfolded exactly as I remembered, but this time I saw every subtle manipulation that had once slipped past me. James stopped by my desk precisely 3 times each day, his visits carefully timed to seem spontaneous. Each conversation was masterfully crafted to make me feel special, understood, different from other girls. I played my part perfectly, letting him see the eager young woman desperate to prove herself. When he suggested shortcuts around standard procedures, I responded with just the right mixture of hesitation and willingness to learn. Every document I touched, every transaction I processed, I documented meticulously, evidence for the future. "You have a natural talent for this," James said on Friday, perching casually on the edge of my desk. "Most people take months to grasp these systems." I smiled shyly, remembering how his praise had once made my heart race. "I just want to contribute something meaningful. That's what I like about you, Sarah. You see the bigger picture." His hand brushed mine as he reached for a report, the touch seemingly accidental. "Speaking of which, would you like to have dinner tomorrow night? We could discuss some ideas I have for streamlining our international transfers." Right, on schedule. In my past life, I had spent hours choosing the perfect outfit for that dinner, desperate to impress him. This time, I knew exactly what he wanted to see. "I'd love to," I said, letting him see the blush I had practiced in the mirror. As James walked away, I caught Amy watching from the marketing department's glass-walled conference room. Her expression was perfect sisterly interest, but I knew she had timed her meeting to witness our interaction. I turned back to my computer, pulling up the files I truly needed to review. The company's financial structure was a complex web of international subsidiaries and holding companies. In my past life, I hadn't understood how James and Amy had used this complexity to hide their theft until it was too late. Now, with years of business experience trapped in my 18-year-old mind, I could see the weaknesses they would exploit. Finding everything okay, Marcus stood in my cubicle entrance, his IT badge hanging loosely around his neck. Unlike James's carefully orchestrated visits, his presence felt genuinely spontaneous. "Just reviewing some transfer protocols," I said, gesturing to my screen. "The authentication system seems oddly vulnerable to internal override." His eyes sharpened with interest. "You notice that too? Most people don't catch it unless they're specifically looking for security flaws. I like understanding how things work." I turned my monitor slightly so he could see better. "See this approval chain? A senior manager could theoretically bypass several verification steps with the right access codes." "Exactly." Marcus leaned closer, his voice dropping. "I've been trying to raise flags about it in IT, but management says the current system is sufficient. I remembered James using those exact override capabilities to process transfers that would later be traced to my login credentials. Maybe we should document our concerns. Officially. Good idea. Marcus straightened up as a group of executives walked past. Coffee later to discuss it? I nodded. Noting how James watched this interaction from across the office, his expression remained pleasant, but I recognized the calculating look in his eyes. In my past life, he had subtly discouraged me from forming close friendships with coworkers, isolating me to make me more dependent on him. The afternoon crawled by in a series of meetings and reports. I watched Amy move through the office with practiced grace, stopping to chat with exactly the right people. Each conversation was an investment in future allies who would believe her tears when she accused me of betraying the family. At 5 o'clock, Marcus and I walked to our usual coffee shop. The late summer sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as he outlined the security concerns he'd identified in the company's systems. The problem is documentation, he explained, stirring his coffee absently. Without a paper trail of these vulnerabilities, it's hard to prove negligence if something goes wrong, unless someone deliberately exploited those vulnerabilities, I said carefully. Then there would be evidence of the override codes being used. Marcus looked at me sharply. You think someone would do that? I shrugged, remembering the damning audit trail that had seemed to prove my guilt. It's always good to be prepared. Back home, I found Amy waiting in my room, perched on my bed like we were still the close sisters we had once been. So, dinner. With James tomorrow? Tell me everything. I sat at my vanity, watching her reflection as I removed my makeup. There's not much to tell. We're just discussing work. Please. Amy rolled her eyes playfully. I saw how he looks at you, and he's exactly your type, all sophisticated and ambitious. In my past life, this conversation had led to hours of sisterly bonding, as Amy encouraged my growing feelings for James. Now, I heard the subtle manipulation in every word, saw how she was setting up her role as the supportive sister who would later be heartbroken by my apparent betrayal. Maybe, I said, letting her see the hopefulness she expected. I really like him, but I don't want to get my hopes up. You should totally go for it. Amy bounced off my bed, coming to stand behind me. Here, let me help you pick out an outfit for tomorrow. First dates are crucial. I submitted to her styling session, remembering how I had once treasured these moments of sisterly closeness. She selected the exact outfit I knew she would, a sophisticated dress that would make me look pretty but not too sexy. After all, she needed James to date me long enough for their plan to work, but not to actually desire me more than her. Perfect, she declared, stepping back to admire her work. He won't know what hit him. If only she knew how true those words would prove. Saturday evening arrived clear and warm. James picked me up in his luxury car, exactly on time. Every detail of the evening played out as I remembered. The exclusive restaurant, the perfectly paired wine, the seemingly deep conversations about art and philosophy. You're different from other women I've met, James said over dessert, his voice intimate. You understand things on a deeper level. In my past life, those words had made me feel special, chosen. Now I heard the careful manipulation behind them, recognized how he was setting up his role as the sophisticated mentor who would guide my career. I just try to see beyond the surface, I said softly, playing my part. There's usually more to things than meets the eye. His smile held genuine appreciation, though not for the reasons he thought. I was proving to be exactly the kind of target he sought, intelligent enough to be useful, insecure enough to be manipulated. Speaking of which, he said, leaning forward slightly, I have some ideas about improving our international transfer systems, but I'd need someone I could trust to help implement them. And there it was, the first hint of how he would eventually convince me to help him move money between accounts. In my past life, I had been flattered by his trust. Now I recognized it as the first thread of the noose he would later tighten around my neck. I'd love to help, I said eagerly, watching him read exactly what he expected to see in my expression. The rest of the evening unfolded perfectly. He kissed me goodnight at my door, a gentle kiss that promised more but didn't push too far. As his car disappeared down the street, I touched my lips thoughtfully. Even knowing what he was, I had to admire the skill of his performance. Amy was waiting up for me, of course. How was it? Tell me everything. I described the evening in choosy detail, watching her react exactly as she had before. Every squeal of excitement, every sisterly hug was a perfect recreation of her past performance. She was good. I had to give her that. I knew he'd like you, she said, hugging me again. You, too, are perfect for each other. I hugged her back, remembering how she had staged similar celebrations 5 years later when James proposed. The same sister who had watched me die on a prison floor had once danced around my bedroom, helping me plan my wedding. The next week, at work, James began integrating me into his special projects. Each task was carefully designed to seem important but not suspicious, gradually acclimating me to bending rules for the greater good of the company. Meanwhile, I continued my coffee meetings with Marcus, documenting every security concern we identified. He proved to be not just knowledgeable, but genuinely ethical, his desire to protect the company driven by principles rather than profit. "I just don't understand why management isn't more concerned," he said during one of our discussions. "These vulnerabilities are like leaving the bank vault door unlocked. Sometimes people don't want to see problems until it's too late," replied, thinking of how my own father had refused to believe I could be innocent until long after my conviction. The pieces were falling into place. James thought he was gradually winning my trust. Amy believed she was perfectly playing the role of supportive sister. Neither of them suspected that every move they made was leading them exactly where I wanted them to go. I caught my reflection in the coffee shop window, seeing both my 18-year-old face and the shadow of the woman who had died in prison. This time would be different. This time, I would make them destroy each other while I reclaimed everything they had stolen from me. The game was progressing perfectly, and I was the only one who knew all the rules. 2 months into my relationship with James, I discovered exactly what I had been waiting for. Late one evening, while reviewing transaction logs with Marcus, we found the first traces of their larger scheme. "These transfers don't make sense," Marcus said, frowning at his screen. "The authentication codes are valid, but the routing patterns are unnecessarily complex." I leaned closer, pretending this was new information. "What do you mean?" "Look here. Money moves from our Asia subsidiary to Luxembourg, then through 3 different holding companies before reaching its final destination. It's like someone's deliberately making the trail hard to follow. In my past life, I had never seen these early warning signs. Now I recognize them as the foundation of James and Amy's plan to take control of the company through carefully orchestrated financial manipulation. "Should we report it?" I asked, already knowing his answer. Marcus hesitated. "Without more evidence, it would just look like standard international business practices. We need to document a pattern." "Perfect. Let him." Think he was protecting me by being cautious. Every day we waited was another day for James and Amy to dig themselves deeper. That evening, James took me to a charity gala. He was particularly attentive, his hand rarely leaving the small of my back as he introduced me to keyboard members. I played my part perfectly, the intelligent but deferential girlfriend who made him look good. "You were amazing tonight," he said later, as we walked through the garden behind the venue. "Everyone was impressed by your grasp of international finance." I smiled, remembering how these moments had once made me feel special. "I just want to make you proud." His kiss was perfectly calculated, passionate enough to seem genuine, but controlled enough to maintain my interest. Over his shoulder, I caught a glimpse of Amy watching from a balcony above, right on schedule. The next morning, I found an urgent email from the Singapore office. One of the transactions Marcus and I had been monitoring had raised automated flags. In my past life, James had convinced me to help him override these warnings. This time, I knew better. "We should let the system handle it," I told him when he stopped by my desk. "Following proper procedures protects everyone." I saw the flash of annoyance in his eyes before he masked it with understanding. "Of course, you're right. I just hate bureaucratic delays when we're trying to help the company grow." That evening, Amy invited herself over for sister time. She sprawled across my bed while I organized my closet, her presence a calculated reminder of familial bonds. "James really cares about you," she said, her voice warm with fake sincerity. "I can tell by the way he looks at you." I turned, catching her watching my reaction in the mirror. "You think so?" "Definitely. He's exactly what you need. Someone who appreciates your intelligence and ambition." The irony almost made me laugh. Every word of encouragement was designed to make her later betrayal more devastating. Every sisterly moment was ammunition she would use to destroy me. At work, the pattern of suspicious transfers continued. Marcus and I documented everything meticulously, building the evidence I would need when the time was right. His technical expertise proved invaluable, catching details I might have missed despite my future knowledge. "Something bigger is going on here," he said during one of our coffee meetings. "These aren't just accounting irregularities." I stirred my coffee thoughtfully. "What do you think it could be?" "Best case scenario, someone's trying to avoid taxes. Worst case," he lowered his voice, "corporate espionage or theft." If only he knew how right he was. The real breakthrough came during a late-night coding session. Marcus had been implementing new security protocols when he discovered a hidden backdoor in the system. "This is sophisticated," he said, fingers flying over his keyboard. "Someone with high-level access created this months ago." I looked over his shoulder at the code, recognizing James's digital signature. In my past life, this backdoor had been used to frame me for the missing millions. "Can you trace who created it?" Marcus shook his head. "They covered their tracks well, but I can monitor it, see who uses it." Perfect. Another piece of evidence for later. That weekend, James took me to his beach house, the same one where he had proposed in my past life. Amy had been there too, helping him plan the perfect moment while sleeping with him behind my back. "You seem distracted," James said as we walked along the shore. I forced myself to smile, just thinking about how lucky I am. His answering smile held genuine satisfaction. He thought he was molding me perfectly, never suspecting that every moment of vulnerability I showed was carefully calculated. Back at work, the pieces continued falling into place. James increasingly involved me in his special projects, each one designed to make me complicit in his schemes. I played along, documenting everything while appearing naively eager to help. Amy maintained her supportive sister act flawlessly. She arranged girls' nights, shopping trips, and family dinners where she could monitor my relationship with James, while pretending to celebrate it. "I've never seen you so happy," she said during one such dinner. "You're practically glowing." Our mother beamed at us both, oblivious to the undercurrents. "My beautiful girls, both so successful. You make me so proud." I smiled, remembering how these same family dynamics had been used against me in court. Every happy moment had been reframed as evidence of my manipulation and deceit. The corporate espionage plot grew clearer with each passing day. Marcus and I traced the pattern of suspicious transfers, watching as money moved through increasingly complex channels. "They're building to something big," he said one evening, rubbing his tired eyes. "These transfers are like practice runs, testing the system's vulnerabilities." I handed him a fresh coffee. "We need to be careful how we handle this information." He caught my hand, his touch gentle. "I won't let anything happen to you, Sarah." The genuine concern in his voice made me pause. In my past life, I had been too blinded by James to notice how different Marcus was, how real. That night, I reviewed all the evidence we had gathered, the documented transfers, the system vulnerabilities, the hidden back door, all of it pointing to a carefully orchestrated plan to take control of the company through financial manipulation. James thought he was grooming me to be his unwitting accomplice. Amy believed she was perfectly positioning herself to be the grieving sister who would expose my crimes. Neither of them realized that every step they took brought them closer to their own destruction. I caught my reflection in the window, seeing both versions of myself, the naive girl who had died in prison and the woman who had returned to rewrite history. A text from James lit up my phone. "Dinner tomorrow? Have something special planned." I knew exactly what he had planned. It was time for the next phase of his manipulation, the one where he would start asking me to bend more serious rules for the good of the company. I typed back a quick acceptance, then opened my secure email to send Marcus the latest documentation. Every piece of evidence was a brick in the wall that would eventually trap James and Amy in their own scheme. The game was evolving exactly as I remembered, but this time I was the one controlling all the pieces. This time justice would be served, but on my terms. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Amy. "Lunch tomorrow? Need sister time." I smiled, remembering how she had used these lunches to gather information about my relationship with James, feeding him details that would help him manipulate me more effectively. "Of course, can't wait," I replied, matching her fake enthusiasm perfectly. Tomorrow would be another day of careful manipulation and documented evidence, another day of playing the perfect girlfriend and loving sister while secretly dismantling their plans piece by piece. I closed my laptop and went to bed, dreaming of prison cells and poison and the sweet taste of revenge. Everything was proceeding exactly as I had planned. Soon, very soon, James and Amy would learn what it felt like to be betrayed by those they trusted most. Lunch with Amy played out exactly as expected. She chose the upscale restaurant where the waiters knew our family, ensuring plenty of witnesses to our sisterly bond. "James seems really serious about you," she said, delicately cutting into her salad. "He talks about you all the time in marketing meetings." I hid my smile behind my water glass. Of course he did. Every mention of me in front of others was carefully calculated to establish his devoted boyfriend persona. "I really think he might be the one," I said, letting her see the hope in my expression. "I've never felt this way about anyone before." Amy reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm so happy for you, sis. You deserve someone special." Her performance was flawless. If I hadn't died watching her smirk over my convulsing body, I might have believed the warmth in her eyes. Back at the office, I found Marcus waiting by my desk with a concerned expression. "We need to talk, privately." In the empty conference room, he pulled up a series of transaction records on his laptop. "Someone's been using that back door we found. Large amounts of money are being moved through those shell companies we tracked." I leaned closer, pretending to be shocked by information I had expected. "Can you trace where the money's going?" "That's the thing." His fingers flew across the keyboard. "The final destination is a holding company owned by board member Robert Chen, our father's biggest biggest rival on the board. In my past life, James had used him as the perfect scapegoat for the missing millions, making it seem like I had been working with Robert to undermine my own father. "We should take this to senior management," Marcus said. I touched his arm, feeling genuine gratitude for his protective instinct. "Not yet. We need more evidence to prove it's not just coincidence." He frowned but nodded. "I'll keep monitoring the transfers. But Sarah, be careful. Someone high up has to be involved in this." If only he knew how right he was. That evening, James took me to dinner at an intimate French restaurant. He ordered expensive wine and spoke passionately about his vision for the company's future. "Your father's generation built something impressive," he said, reaching for my hand. "But they're too conservative, too afraid of innovation. The company needs fresh leadership to reach its full potential." I remembered how compelling these speeches had once seemed, how easily I had believed he was sharing his deepest ambitions with me alone. "What kind of innovation?" I asked, playing my role perfectly. His eyes lit up with calculated enthusiasm. "I have some ideas, but I'd need someone I could trust completely. Someone brilliant and brave enough to challenge the status quo, right on schedule." In my past life, this conversation had been the beginning of my downfall. This time, it was another piece of evidence documenting his manipulation. The next morning, I found Amy waiting in my office. "Late night with James?" she asked, her smile knowing. "He's amazing," I gushed, watching her catalog every detail of my lovesick expression. "He sees me in a way no one else does." Amy perched on my desk, her designer suit perfectly pressed. "Just be careful, sis. Men like James have big ambitions. Make sure you're not just a stepping stone." The warning was masterfully delivered, designed to make me work harder to prove my worth to James while simultaneously establishing her concerned sister credentials. I spent the afternoon reviewing the latest batch of suspicious transfers with Marcus. His technical expertise had proven invaluable in documenting the complex web of financial manipulation. "Look at this pattern," he said, pointing to his screen. "Someone's systematically testing different override codes, finding the ones that don't trigger automatic alerts." I nodded, remembering how these same codes had later been used to process the transfers that landed me in prison. "We should document everything. Times, dates, authorization levels." Marcus glanced at me curiously. "You seem very calm about all this." I forced a laugh. "Trust me, I'm terrified. I just believe in being thorough." That evening, I found my father working late in his office. In my past life, I had rarely sought him out, too intimidated by his perpetual disappointment. This time, I had a different agenda. "Daddy?" I used the childhood name deliberately, watching him soften slightly. "Can I ask your advice about something?" He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "What's on your mind?" "I've been reviewing our international transfer protocols," I said carefully. "Some of the override capabilities seem unusually broad." My father frowned. "Those protocols were established years ago. They're industry standard. But couldn't someone abuse them? Move money through multiple subsidiaries to hide the trail?" He studied me thoughtfully. "You've been paying attention. Good. Keep documenting anything suspicious. The board's been concerned about potential vulnerabilities." Perfect. Another witness who would remember my early concerns when everything unraveled. The next day, James invited me to an exclusive business dinner. He seated me next to Robert Chen, encouraging us to discuss international finance. "Your daughter has impressive insight," Robert told my father later. "She raised some interesting points about our transfer protocols." I saw James's brief flash of annoyance before he masked it with pride. He hadn't expected me to draw attention to the very systems he was exploiting. That night, Amy called for our daily sister chat. "I heard you made quite an impression on Robert Chen." "Just lucky," I said modestly. The right topic came up. "James must be so proud. He tells everyone what a perfect match you are." I let her hear my happy sigh, knowing she would report every detail back to him. I really think this could be forever. The next few weeks passed in a careful dance of documentation and deception. Marcus and I tracked the escalating pattern of suspicious transfers while I played my role as James's adoring girlfriend. "Someone's getting bolder," Marcus said during one of our late-night sessions. "The amounts are getting larger, the routing more complex." I studied the transaction logs, recognizing the preparations for the final phase of James and Amy's plan. "We need to be ready when they make their big move." He caught my hand, his expression serious. "Sarah, I'm worried about you. The higher this goes, the more dangerous it becomes." The genuine concern in his voice made my chest tight. In my past life, I had no one watching out for me like this. "I trust you," I said softly, meaning it. A knock at the door made us jump apart. Amy stood there, her smile perfectly pleasant. "Working late again? James is looking for you, sis." I gathered my things, noting how her eyes tracked every movement between Marcus and me. Another detail she would report back to James James, fueling his need to isolate me from potential allies. The pieces were falling into place perfectly. Every suspicious transfer was documented, every manipulation recorded, every witness primed to remember key details when the truth finally emerged. James thought he was grooming me for sacrifice. Amy believed she was orchestrating my perfect downfall. Neither suspected that their own actions were building the case that would destroy them. I caught my reflection in the office window, seeing both the naive girl they thought they were deceiving and the woman who had returned from death to deliver justice. Soon, very soon, they would learn what true betrayal felt like, and this time, I would be the one watching them fall. The acceleration of James and Amy's plan became evident on a crisp autumn morning. I arrived at work to find my security clearance had been upgraded, giving me access to higher-level financial controls. "You've earned this," James said, his pride perfectly feigned. "The board is impressed with your dedication." In my past life, this promotion had felt like validation. Now I recognized it as the final piece they needed, my increased access providing the perfect scapegoat for their scheme. Marcus caught my eye from across the office, his expression concerned. During our lunch break, he pulled me into an empty conference room. "Those system overrides we've been tracking, they're being used more frequently. Someone's preparing for something big." I nodded, reviewing the data on his laptop. "The pattern's clear now. Money moving through multiple subsidiaries, each transfer carefully timed to avoid detection. We should go to your father," Marcus said. "This is too dangerous to handle alone." I touched his arm gently. "Not yet. We need to catch them in the act." Later that afternoon, Amy stopped by my desk. "Dinner tonight? I feel like we barely talk anymore." Her timing wasn't coincidental. James had scheduled an important board meeting for the next morning, and Amy wanted to ensure I had no time to review the latest transactions. "Of course," I said. "I've missed our sister time." Over expensive sushi, Amy played her role perfectly. She asked about James, gushed over my promotion, and skillfully gathered information about my access to company finances. "I'm so proud of you," she said, reaching for my hand. "You're finally becoming who you were meant to be." If only she knew how true those words were. Back at the office, the pace of suspicious transfers increased. James began involving me in more complex transactions, each one designed to implicate me further in his scheme. "We're streamlining operations," he explained smoothly, "making the company more efficient." I played along, documenting every override code he gave me, every instruction that violated standard protocols. Each piece of evidence was carefully backed up to secure servers Marcus had helped me set up. "Someone's getting sloppy," Marcus said during one of our late-night sessions. "These latest transfers, they're leaving clearer trails." I studied the transaction logs, recognizing the pattern from my past life. "They think they're untouchable." He looked at me curiously. "You sound almost certain." "Just a feeling," I said, turning back to my screen. The next day, James took me to lunch at an exclusive restaurant. His charm was in full force as he outlined his vision for the company's future. "We could do amazing things together," he said, reaching for my hand. "But we need to be bold, willing to bypass outdated restrictions." I smiled, remembering how these same words had once convinced me to help him override security protocols. "Whatever you need, I'm here." His answering smile held genuine satisfaction. Everything was proceeding according to his plan. That evening, I found Amy waiting in my apartment. "Surprise! I brought wine and movies. We need sister bonding time." Her presence was calculated to prevent me from reviewing the day's transactions. I played along, letting her fill my wine glass while she probed for information about my work with James. The next morning, I discovered the first major transfer had been processed using my security credentials. In my past life, this had been the beginning of the end. This time, I was ready. "These numbers don't make sense," Marcus said, frowning at his screen. "The documentation shows your authorization, but the timing overlaps with when you were at dinner with your sister." I leaned closer, pretending surprise. "That's impossible. I wasn't even in the office." He typed rapidly, pulling up more data. "Someone's using your access codes. We need to report this." "Wait," I said, touching his arm. "Let's gather more evidence first." His expression was troubled. "Sarah, this is serious. They're setting you up." If only he knew how right he was. The next week brought more unauthorized transfers, each one carefully documented by Marcus and me. James increased his mentoring sessions, each conversation designed to make me feel special while further implicating me in his scheme. Amy maintained her supportive sister act flawlessly, arranging family dinners and shopping trips that kept me away from the office at crucial moments. "You seem distracted lately," she said during one such outing. "Is everything okay with James?" I forced a smile. "Just work stress. These new responsibilities are intense." Her concerned expression was perfect. "Don't let it overwhelm you. Maybe you should take a break." The suggestion was carefully calculated. Any decrease in my attention would make it easier for them to use my access codes without detection. That evening, I found my father working late again. Daddy, can we talk? He looked up from his papers. What's wrong? I'm worried about some of these transfers I'm being asked to approve. The documentation seems irregular. His frown was thoughtful. You've noticed that too? The board's been asking questions about our international subsidiaries. Another witness primed for when everything unraveled. Later that night, Marcus called with urgent news. Someone's accessing the system right now using your credentials. I pulled up the secure monitoring program we'd installed. Can you trace the location? Already did. It's coming from James's private office. Perfect. Another piece of evidence for later. The next day, James was particularly attentive. You look tired, darling. Let me handle those approvals for you. I smiled, letting him see exactly what he expected. What would I do without you? His kiss was calculated to reinforce my trust. Behind us, I caught Amy watching from her office, her expression carefully neutral. The game was approaching its critical phase. Every piece was in position, every player convinced they knew the full scope of the game. None of them suspected that the naive girl they thought they were manipulating had died once before, that she had returned with the knowledge to turn their own scheme against them. Soon, very soon, they would learn what it felt like to be betrayed by those they trusted most. And this time, I would be the one watching them fall. I caught my reflection in the office window, seeing both versions of myself, the victim they thought I was, and the architect of their destruction I had become. The endgame was approaching. It was time to start the final phase of my plan. The first major crack in James' dice and Amy's alliance appeared during a routine board meeting. I sat quietly taking notes while James presented his quarterly report, watching Amy's subtle reactions. Our international divisions have shown remarkable growth, James said smoothly, particularly in regions under new management. I caught the slight tightening of Amy's shoulders. In my past life, I had missed these signs of tension between them. Now, I recognized them as the first hints that their partnership was straining under pressure. After the meeting, Marcus pulled me into his office. Someone accessed those flagged accounts again last night, but this time, they used Amy's credentials. I leaned over his shoulder, studying the logs. Can you prove it wasn't actually Amy? Security cameras show she was at a charity event during the access time, just like you were at dinner when your credentials were used. Perfect. Evidence that both our access codes were being misused. That evening, James invited me to an intimate dinner at his penthouse. The setting was carefully orchestrated, from the expensive wine to the subtle lighting. I've been thinking about our future, he said, taking my hand across the table. You understand my vision for the company in a way few others do. I smiled, remembering how these same words had once made my heart race. I want to help make that vision reality. His answering smile held genuine satisfaction. There are some transactions I need your help with. Strictly confidential, of course, right on schedule. In my past life, this conversation had led to my first knowing involvement in his scheme. This time, I had different plans. Whatever you need, I said softly. I trust you completely. The next morning, I found Amy waiting by my car in the parking garage. Her expression was perfectly concerned. We need to talk, she said, about James. I let her guide me to a quiet cafe, noting how she chose a table where we could be easily observed by other patrons. I'm worried about some of the things I'm hearing, she said, stirring her coffee. People are asking questions about certain financial transactions. In my past life, I had missed the warning beneath her words. Now I recognize this conversation as part of their plan to establish her role as the concerned sister. What kind of questions? I asked innocently. Just be careful, she said, reaching for my hand. I couldn't bear to see you hurt. Back at the office, Marcus showed me more evidence of unauthorized system access. The pattern's clear now. Someone's using multiple credentials to hide their tracks. I nodded, reviewing the data. We need to be ready when they make their big move. His expression was troubled. Sarah, I've been thinking, what if we're dealing with more than one person? If only he knew how right he was. That afternoon, I caught James and Amy in what they thought was a private moment. Through the glass walls of an empty conference room, I watched their heated discussion, noting how Amy's gestures became increasingly agitated. In my past life, I had been too blind to see these moments of conflict between them. Now I recognized them as signs that their alliance was beginning to fracture under the weight of their scheme. Later, James stopped by my desk with an urgent request. I need you to approve these transfers immediately. It's crucial for the merger we're planning. I studied the documents, recognizing them as part of the paper trail that would later be used to frame me. Of course, anything to help. His kiss on my cheek was perfectly calculated. What would I do without you? That evening, I found my father still in his office. "Daddy, can we talk about the new transfer protocols?" He looked up from his work, his expression thoughtful. "You've noticed irregularities too?" I sat across from him, choosing my words carefully. "I'm concerned about how easily security measures can be bypassed." Another witness primed for when everything unraveled. The next day brought more signs of strain between James and Amy. During a department meeting, I caught their subtle exchange of glares when they thought no one was watching. Marcus noticed too. "Something's off with those two. They used to be inseparable." I pretended surprise. "Really? I never noticed them being particularly close." His fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up more security logs. "Look at this. Their access patterns have changed. They're not coordinating like they used to." Perfect. The cracks were widening exactly as I had planned. That night, Amy called for one of our sister chats. Her voice was slightly strained despite her attempt at normalcy. "How are things with James? He seems distracted lately." I let her hear the worry in my voice. "You've noticed too?" I thought it was just me. Her attempt at reassurance was perfect. "I'm sure it's just work stress. He cares about you so much." If only she knew how those same caring words would soon be used against her. The next morning, I found more unauthorized transfers processed under my credentials. James was getting bolder, confident in his ability to control the situation. Marcus was waiting at my desk with fresh evidence. "We need to move soon. They're accelerating their timeline." I touched his arm gently. "Just a little longer. We need to be absolutely certain." His concern was genuine. "Sarah, they're setting you up to take the fall. You have to see that." If only he knew that was exactly what I was counting on. The pieces were moving faster now, the game entering its critical phase. James thought he was manipulating me perfectly. Amy believed she was maintaining her role flawlessly. Neither suspected that their own actions were leading them exactly where I wanted them to go. I caught my reflection in the office window, seeing both versions of myself, the naive victim they thought they were destroying, and the architect of their downfall I had become. The cracks in their alliance were widening. Soon those cracks would become chasms, and I would watch them destroy each other while I reclaimed everything they had stolen from me. Justice was approaching, but this time it would be served on my terms. The crisis point arrived on a cold winter morning. I entered the office to find James waiting at my desk, his expression carefully controlled. "We need to talk," he said quietly, privately. In the empty conference room, he revealed what I had been waiting for. "Someone's been tracking our financial transactions, documenting everything." I kept my expression neutral, remembering how this same conversation had terrified me in my past life. "What do you mean? Don't play innocent?" he snapped, mask slipping for a moment. "I know you've been working with that IT guy, monitoring system access." I let fear show in my eyes, playing the role he expected. "James, I can explain. Can you?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Can you explain why you've been documenting evidence against me while pretending to support my vision?" Before I could respond, Amy burst into the room. Her perfect composure was cracking, panic visible beneath her polished exterior. "They're auditing the international accounts," she said breathlessly. "All of them." James's expression darkened. "What did you do?" "Me?" Amy's laugh was brittle. "I'm not the one who got sloppy with the transfer protocols." I watched their exchange silently, remembering how differently this scene had played out in my past life. Then I had been the one panicking while they presented a united front. "We need to contain this," James said, turning back to me. "Sarah, if you cooperate, we can protect you." The same words he had used before, when he convinced me to take the blame for their crimes. This time I heard the threat beneath his false concern. "Protect me from what?" I asked softly. Amy moved closer, her sisterly concern perfectly practiced. "Think about father, about the family reputation. We can make this go away quietly." Back at my desk, I found Marcus waiting with urgent news. The audit team found something, multiple unauthorized access points, all tied to your credentials. I nodded, letting him see my worry. "James knows we've been tracking him." His expression hardened. "We need to go to your father now, before they can cover their tracks. They'll deny everything," I said. "It's my word against theirs." Marcus grabbed my hand. "Not anymore. I've been building a separate case file, documenting everything. Times, dates, access patterns. They can't deny the evidence." I squeezed his hand, feeling genuine gratitude. In my past life, I had no one fighting in my corner like this. The day progressed in a series of tense encounters. James maintained his threatening charm, while Amy alternated between sisterly concern and veiled warnings. During a department meeting, I watched them exchange heated glares when they thought no one was looking. The strain of their unraveling scheme was showing in small ways, visible only to those who knew what to look for. "This is your last chance," James said later, cornering me in the parking garage. "Cooperate, and I'll make sure you're taken care of." I looked into his eyes. seeing the cold calculation that had once fooled me. Like you took care of me before? His expression flickered with confusion before smoothing back into practiced concern. He didn't understand my words. Not yet. That evening, Amy appeared at my apartment unannounced. We need to talk about James. I let her in, noting how her designer outfit couldn't quite hide her nervous energy. He's not who you think he is, she said, pacing my living room. I've discovered some things, transactions that don't make sense. In my past life, I had missed the manipulation in this moment. How she was positioning herself as the concerned sister who would later expose my crimes. What kind of transactions? I asked innocently. Just be careful, she said, squeezing my hand. I couldn't bear to see my sister hurt. The same words she would later repeat on the witness stand, tears streaming down her face as she described my betrayal of the family. Later that night, Marcus called with more evidence. They're trying to erase their tracks, but I've got it all backed up. Multiple servers. Impossible to delete. I smiled in the darkness of my apartment. You've thought of everything. I won't. Let them frame you, he said fiercely. Whatever they're planning, we'll stop them. If only he knew that being framed was exactly what I was counting on. The next morning brought more signs of the growing crisis. James was unusually tense in meetings, while Amy's perfect composure showed cracks around the edges. I found my father working late again, his expression troubled as he reviewed audit reports. The board is asking questions, he said when I entered, about unauthorized transfers and system access. I sat across from him, choosing my words carefully. I've noticed some irregularities too. His gaze sharpened. What kind of irregularities? Another witness primed for what was coming. The pressure continued building throughout the week. Each day brought new threats from James, more desperate, attempts at manipulation from Amy. Think about your future, James said during one particularly tense conversation. Your career, your reputation, all of that could disappear overnight. I met his gaze steadily. Is that a threat? His smile was cold, just a friendly warning from someone who cares about you. The same words he had used before when he convinced me to sign the confession that would send me to prison. Marcus grew increasingly concerned as the evidence mounted. They're getting desperate. That makes them dangerous. I touched his arm gently. I trust you. His expression softened. I won't let them hurt you. If only he knew that this time I wasn't the one who needed protection. The pieces were falling exactly where I needed them. James's threats were becoming more obvious. Amy's manipulation more desperate. Their perfect alliance was crumbling under the weight of their own schemes. I caught my reflection in the office window, seeing both versions of myself, the victim they thought they were trapping, and the architect of their destruction I had become. The crisis was reaching its peak. Soon, very soon, they would learn what it felt like to be truly betrayed. The trap sprang during a crucial board meeting. I sat quietly, taking notes as James presented his quarterly report, watching the tension build in the room. Our international growth continues to exceed expectations, James said smoothly. All transactions have been properly documented and verified. That was my cue. I raised my hand, ignoring Amy's sharp intake of breath. Actually, I have some concerns about those transactions. The board members leaned forward as I distributed the files Marcus and I had prepared. Evidence of unauthorized access, falsified, documentation, systematic fraud. These records show a pattern of financial manipulation, I explained calmly. Multiple instances of security protocols being bypassed using various employee credentials. James's composure cracked for a moment before he recovered. These allegations are completely unfounded. Sarah is obviously confused about standard business practices. I turned to my father, whose expression had grown increasingly grave as he reviewed the evidence. The audit team has already verified everything in those files. Every transaction, every override code, every unauthorized access. Amy stood abruptly, her perfect poise shattering. This is ridiculous. Sarah's obviously trying to cover her own involvement. I smiled, pulling out another set of documents. Interesting you should say that. These security logs show both our credentials being used simultaneously while we were documented to be elsewhere. The boardroom erupted in controlled chaos. James attempted to dismiss the evidence while Amy tried to reach me, presumably to stop me from revealing more. Marcus chose that moment to enter, carrying additional files. I have the complete backup of all system access records, including timestamps of when specific override codes were used. I watched James and Amy exchange panicked glances. Their carefully orchestrated scheme was unraveling in front of the entire board. Mr. Chen, James said, addressing my father, surely you can see this is a misunderstanding. My father's expression was cold. The only thing I see is evidence of systematic fraud using my daughter's security credentials. Amy tried one last time to salvage the situation. Daddy, please! Sarah's clearly manipulating the evidence. I pulled out my final piece of documentation suspicion. These records show regular meetings between James and Amy dating back months before any of this began, always carefully scheduled to avoid detection. The color drained from both their faces as they realized the extent of my documentation. Every secret meeting, every unauthorized access, every step of their scheme had been recorded and verified. James made one last attempt to regain control. This is all circumstantial. There's no proof of actual wrongdoing. Actually, Marcus interjected, we have video footage of both of you accessing the system using Sarah's credentials while she was provably elsewhere. The boardroom fell silent as the evidence mounted. Years of careful manipulation and fraud laid bare in meticulous detail. Amy broke first, turning on James. He orchestrated everything. I was just following his instructions. James's laugh was cold. Really? Should we discuss whose idea it was to use Sarah's access codes? I sat back, watching them destroy each other exactly as I had planned. Every accusation, every betrayal, played out in front of witnesses who had once believed in their perfect facades. My father called for security as James and Amy's accusations grew more heated, each trying to save themselves by condemning the other. In the chaos that followed, Marcus moved to stand beside me. Are you okay? I smiled, genuine warmth breaking through my careful composure. I am now. The board called an emergency session as security escorted James and Amy out. Their perfect alliance had crumbled exactly as I had engineered. Later, in my father's office, he studied me with new eyes. You knew. All along, you were gathering evidence. I suspected, I said carefully. The patterns were there if you knew where to look. His expression held pride mixed with regret. I should have seen it sooner. Should have trusted you more. Amy tried to reach me before security removed her from the building. Sister, please. You have to understand. I met her desperate gaze calmly. I understand perfectly. I understand exactly who you are now. James maintained his composure until the end, even as security escorted him out. You'll regret this, Sarah. You have no idea what you've done. I watched him go, remembering how those same words had once terrified me. Actually, I know exactly what I've done. The evidence Marcus and I had gathered was irrefutable. Every aspect of their scheme documented in perfect detail. Every betrayal recorded for the board to review. In my office, I found Marcus waiting with concern etched on his face. That was incredibly brave. I touched his hand gently. I couldn't have done it without you. His smile was genuine, so different from James's practiced charm. I told you, I wouldn't let them hurt you. The aftermath unfolded exactly as I had orchestrated. James and Amy's perfect masks had shattered, revealing the truth of their characters to everyone who had once believed in them. I caught my reflection in the window, seeing both versions of myself. The naive girl who had died in prison and the woman who had returned to deliver justice. The trap had sprung perfectly. Now it was time for the final phase of my plan. The fall from grace happened swiftly. James was called before the board to explain the mounting evidence against him. His usual smooth charm cracked under the weight of irrefutable documentation. This is clearly a misunderstanding, he insisted, but his voice held an edge of desperation. Sarah must have misinterpreted standard business practices. I sat quietly, watching him grasp at explanations that grew increasingly thin. Each attempt to justify the unauthorized transfers only highlighted the careful trail of evidence Marcus and I had compiled. Amy burst into the meeting, her designer outfit slightly disheveled. I can explain everything. The board chairman raised his hand, silencing her. Ms. Chen, please wait your turn. We're currently reviewing Mr. Parker's involvement. James's expression darkened as Amy ignored the warning and continued. He manipulated all of us, used my sister's feelings to gain access to company accounts. That's rich, James snapped, his polished facade finally shattering. Whose idea? Was it to use her credentials in the first place? I watched their perfect alliance crumble as they turned on each other. Every secret, every manipulation exposed in their desperate attempts to avoid blame. Sarah was never supposed to take the fall, Amy cried, tears streaming down her face. You promised we would protect her. James laughed coldly. Like you protected her when you suggested using her access codes? When you scheduled all those sister bonding sessions to keep her away from the office during critical transfers? The board members exchanged glances as Amy and James continued to expose their own scheme. Each accusation revealed another layer of their calculated betrayal. My father sat stone-faced as his youngest daughter and her secret lover destroyed each other. The evidence Marcus and I had gathered left no room for doubt about their guilt. I think we've heard enough, the chairman said finally. Security will escort you both out. The police have already been notified. Amy made one last attempt to reach me as security approached. Sister, please, you have to understand. I was trying to protect you. I met her desperate gaze calmly. Like you protected me by dating James behind my back? By helping him set me up to take the blame? Her perfect mask cracked completely. He said we could be together, that the company would be ours once you were out of the way. James turned on her instantly. You delusional little girl. You were just a means to an end, just like your sister. The boardroom fell silent at this revelation. Amy's composure shattered as she realized how completely James had manipulated her. You said you loved me, she whispered, tears ruining her careful makeup. All those years, you promised we would be together. James's smile was cruel. And you believed me, just like Sarah believed me. You Chen sisters are so desperately eager for love, so easy to manipulate. Security stepped forward as Amy lunged at James, her years of careful poise forgotten in her rage. The perfect couple who had orchestrated my destruction now tried to destroy each other. I watched them being led away, remembering how differently this scene had played out in my past life. Then, I had been the one escorted out in disgrace, while they maintained their innocent facades. Marcus appeared at my side, his presence steadying. You okay? I smiled, genuine warmth breaking through my careful composure. Better than okay. Later, in my father's office, he studied me with new understanding. You knew about them. All this time, you were gathering evidence. I had help, I said, acknowledging Marcus's role. Once we saw the pattern of fraud, we knew we had to document everything. My father's expression held pride mixed with regret. I should have trusted you more. Should have seen what was happening in my own company. The police interviews that followed were exhaustive. Every piece of evidence Marcus and I had gathered was reviewed. Every transaction traced to its source. James maintained his composure, even as the evidence mounted against him. You have no idea what you've done, Sarah. No idea what I could have given you. I met his cold gaze steadily. I know exactly what you intended to give me. Prison time for your crimes. Amy broke down completely during questioning, revealing years of manipulation and deceit. Her tearful confession implicated James in schemes beyond what even I had known about. He said we would run the company together, she sobbed. That once Sarah was out of the way, we could stop hiding. The detective's expression was unsympathetic as she detailed their plan to frame me for their crimes. Every confession confirmed the evidence Marcus and I had gathered. Back at the office, I found Marcus waiting in my father's executive suite. The board wants to speak with you. I smiled, knowing what was coming. In my past life, this meeting had ended with my arrest. This time, justice would be served differently. The chairman's expression was grave as the evidence was reviewed one final time. Each document, each security log, each recorded confession built an irrefutable case against James and Amy. Ms. Chen, he said finally, the board would like to commend your handling of this situation. Your attention to detail and commitment to protecting the company is exactly what we need in senior management. I accepted their praise gracefully, watching my father's proud smile. The position they offered was everything James had tried to steal from me in my past life. The news of James and Amy's arrests spread quickly through the company. Their perfect facades had crumbled, revealing the truth of their characters to everyone who had once believed in them. I caught my reflection in my new office window, seeing both versions of myself, the naive girl who had died in prison and the woman who had returned to deliver justice. Marcus joined me, his expression warm with admiration. You did it. You brought them down. I turned to him, feeling the weight of my past life finally lifting. We did it. I couldn't have managed any of this without you. The fall from grace was complete. James and Amy had destroyed each other, just as I had planned. Now it was time to begin my new life, one free from their toxic influence. Justice had been served, but on my terms this time. The legal consequences unfolded swiftly. James and Amy faced multiple charges of fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage. Their perfect facades crumbled completely during the preliminary hearings. My father attended every session, watching silently as the evidence Marcus and I had gathered was presented. Each document, each recorded conversation, each security log built an irrefutable case against them. She orchestrated everything, James claimed, pointing at Amy, used her position as Sarah's sister to manipulate events. Amy's tears flowed freely as she turned on him. He promised we would be together, said once Sarah was gone, we could stop hiding. The prosecutor methodically dismantled their attempts to blame each other. The evidence trail was too clear, too carefully documented to leave any doubt about their joint conspiracy. In my new office, I reviewed the final damage reports with Marcus. The full scope of their scheme had been even larger than I remembered from my past life. They would have destroyed the company, Marcus said, studying the financial records. Not just your career, but everything your father built. I touched his hand gently. Thank you for believing in me, for helping me stop them. His smile was warm, genuine in a way James's never had been. I always knew there was something special about you. The board appointed appointed me to oversee the restructuring of our international divisions. The position James had tried to steal from me was now mine by right, earned through merit and dedication. My father called me into his office after the verdicts were announced. His expression held pride, mixed with regret. "I should have seen it sooner," he said quietly. "Should have recognized what was happening in my own family." I sat across from him, remembering how differently this conversation had gone in my past life. "We all missed the signs at first. Not you," he said, studying me carefully. "You saw through them, gathered the evidence we needed while maintaining your cover." The company recovered quickly under our joint leadership. Each day brought new opportunities to rebuild what James and Amy had tried to destroy. Marcus became an invaluable partner in restructuring our security systems. His technical expertise combined perfectly with my financial knowledge. "We make a good team," he said one evening as we worked late, in more ways than one. I smiled, feeling genuine warmth for the first time since my rebirth. "Yes, we do." My mother struggled to reconcile herself to Amy's betrayal. Her perfect image of sisterly devotion had been shattered by the evidence. "How could she do this?" she asked during one of our quiet dinners. Her own sister. I watched her grapple with the truth about her favored daughter. Sometimes people aren't who we think they are. The company gala that winter marked our official recovery. I stood beside my father as he announced the new security measures and management structure. Marcus joined us on stage, his presence steady and reassuring. The ring he had given me earlier that week caught the light as I raised my glass in celebration. In the prison visiting room, Amy made one last attempt to manipulate me. "Sister, please, you have to forgive me." I met her desperate gaze calmly. "I forgive you, but I will never forget." Her perfect mask cracked completely at my words. For the first time, she saw me clearly, recognized the strength she had mistaken for weakness. James maintained his cold composure even during sentencing. "You have no idea what you've given up, Sarah." I smiled, thinking of my new life, my true partnership with Marcus. "Actually, I know exactly what I've gained." The restructured company flourished under our leadership. Each success was sweeter for knowing how differently things could have gone. My father gradually handed more control over to me, proud of the leader I had become. The trust between us grew stronger with each passing day. Marcus and I planned our wedding for the spring, a celebration of new beginnings and genuine love, so different from the elaborate affair James and I had once planned. The company board unanimously supported my promotion to executive vice president. The position felt right this time, earned through merit rather than manipulation. I caught my reflection in my office window, seeing only one version of myself now, the woman who had overcome betrayal to build something stronger. The legal aftermath was complete. Justice had been served, lives had been rebuilt, and love had been found in its truest form. This time, the story had the ending it deserved. Marcus squeezed my hand as we left the office that evening. "Ready to go home?" I smiled, feeling the simple joy of genuine happiness. More than ready. The future stretched out before us, bright with possibilities I had once thought lost forever. This time, I would live it on my own terms. Amy and James would serve their sentences, their perfect facades permanently shattered. Meanwhile, I would continue building the life they had tried to steal from me. My father called me into his office one last time before retiring. "You've made me proud, Sarah, not just for exposing their scheme, but for who you've become." I hugged him, feeling the strength of our rebuilt relationship. "Thank you for believing in me." The company Christmas party was a testament to our recovery. Employees celebrated not just our financial success, but the restoration of trust and integrity. Marcus proposed a toast to new beginnings. Looking around at my family, my colleagues, my future husband, I knew this was how things were always meant to be. The story of betrayal and redemption would be told in business schools for years to come. But for me, it was simply the path that led me to where I belonged. My mother finally found peace with the truth about Amy. "You were always the stronger one," she said during our weekly lunch. I just couldn't see it. The spring wedding approached, a celebration of genuine love rather than calculated manipulation. Each detail reflected the truth of our relationship. I visited the cemetery where my past self had died, leaving flowers for the girl I had once been. Her death had given me the strength to build this new life. The future was secure, built on a foundation of truth and trust rather than manipulation and deceit. This time, the story had found its proper ending. Marcus waited for me in our new home, his love a constant reminder of how different this life was from my past one. Together, we would write our own story, free from the shadows of betrayal that had once defined my existence. Standing before my own grave on a crisp spring morning, I felt a profound sense of closure. The headstone marked the death of Sarah Chen, victim of betrayal and manipulation, but I was no longer that person. The cemetery was quiet, except for birdsong. Marcus waited respectfully by the car, understanding understanding my need for this moment alone. In my hand, I held the necklace James had given me in my past life, the one Amy had worn as she watched me die. I placed it gently on the grave, a final farewell to the naive girl I had been. The morning sun caught the diamonds, making them sparkle one last time before I turned away. My mother waited at home, finally ready to confront her own role in what had happened. The perfectly arranged living room felt different now, stripped of pretense. I enabled her, she said quietly as I sat beside her, always favoring Amy, excusing her behavior. I helped create the person she became. I took her hand, feeling genuine forgiveness. We all have to take responsibility for our choices. The company had flourished under the new management structure. Each day brought fresh opportunities to build something stronger than what James and Amy had tried to destroy. Marcus and I worked seamlessly together, his technical expertise complementing my financial acumen. The security systems we designed became industry standard, protecting other companies from similar schemes. My father watched proudly as I led board meetings in the same room where James and Amy had once plotted my destruction. His trust in me grew stronger with each success. The final confrontation with my mother happened naturally, years of unspoken truth finally surfacing. Her perfect society facade cracked as she acknowledged her part in fostering Amy's toxic behavior. I wanted so badly to believe in the perfect family image, she admitted. I couldn't see how it was destroying us. I understood now what I hadn't in my past life. The need for perfection had corrupted all of us, turned family bonds into weapons. Marcus proposed on a quiet evening at home. No grand gestures or manipulative speeches, just genuine love and partnership. Everything my relationship with James had lacked. The ring was elegant, but understated, chosen for my taste rather than social impact. So different from the flashy diamond James had used to mark his territory. Planning. Our wedding became a celebration of authenticity. No elaborate society affair like my canceled wedding to James, just a genuine expression of love surrounded by true friends. My father walked me down the aisle, his pride evident in every step. The company executives who had once doubted me now stood witness to my happiness. Marcus's vows were simple and heartfelt, nothing like James's practiced declarations. Each word rang with truth rather than calculation. The reception was filled with genuine joy rather than social networking. Even my mother relaxed her perfect hostess persona, allowing real emotion to show. Later that night, Marcus and I walked through our garden, planning our future together. No hidden agendas, no manipulation, just shared dreams and honest love. I caught my reflection in the window, seeing only one version of myself now, strong, successful, loved for who I truly was, rather than what others wanted me to be. The company continued to thrive under our leadership. Each quarter brought new growth, built on a foundation of integrity rather than deception. My mother finally found peace with her own transformation. The society events she once lived for became genuine celebrations rather than performances. The news of Amy's early release brought no fear, only acceptance. She was no longer the sister who had helped destroy me, just a cautionary tale of corrupted love. James remained in prison, his appeals denied by courts that saw through his manipulations. His perfect facade had crumbled completely, revealing the truth beneath. Marcus and I welcomed our first child in the spring, a daughter we named Hope. Her innocent joy reminded me daily of the power of genuine love. My father retired fully, confident in leaving his legacy in my hands. The company he had built would continue growing stronger, protected by the lessons we had learned. The story of betrayal and redemption became a case study in business schools, teaching future leaders about the importance of integrity and vigilance. But for me, it was simply the path that led me to where I belonged. Each step, even the painful ones, had brought me to this moment of genuine happiness. Standing in my office at sunset, I watched the city lights come alive. Marcus joined me, his presence as steady and true as always. "Regrets?" he asked softly. I smiled, thinking of the girl in the grave, the woman I had become, and the future we would build together. Not anymore. The city sparkled below us, full of possibilities. This time, I would live each moment fully, free from the shadows of betrayal and manipulation. My story had found its true ending, not in revenge or destruction, but in the strength to build something real from the ashes of what was lost. Marcus squeezed my hand as we headed home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that genuine love and integrity could overcome any betrayal. The future stretched out before us, bright with promise. This time, I would write my own story, one page at a time, surrounded by the truth of real love and family.